Greetings again everyone, and today I'm checking out another Tamron lens, their 35mm f2.8 Di III OSD M1-2. This is another in Tamron's lineup of lightweight, inexpensive prime lenses with a 1:2 macro capability, and it's for Sony's E-mount mirrorless cameras, full frame or APS-C. It has a low price of $250 or about £240 here in the UK. I'd like to thank Tamron's UK distributor for loaning me this lens for testing for a couple of weeks, although as usual it's a totally independent review. On a full frame camera, 35mm is that classic moderately wide angle which makes itself useful for all kinds of photography without pushing your subject too far out of the picture. On an APS-C camera, the image looks a little tighter, of course. While its maximum aperture of f2.8 doesn't exactly call for front page headlines to be put on hold, it is at least somewhat bright, giving you a small advantage in light gathering and out of focus backgrounds over a standard kit lens. And that 1:2 macro feature, while not being close enough to make this a true macro option, is certainly loads of fun for getting up close and personal to smaller subjects. Now, the lens itself seems a bit bigger than it should be. For example, Samyang make a similar lens that's half the size of this one. Perhaps it's something to do with Tamron's recent philosophy of making sure as many of their lenses have medium-sized 67mm filter threads as possible, which seems bigger than necessary considering this lens's optics. Perhaps the designers preferred ideology over practicality here. Having said that, it's still hardly a big lens, and at a weight of only 210 grams, it's certainly pretty light. It might be mostly made of plastic, but it does feel solid enough, and having a weather sealing gasket at the rear is a good touch. I do really like Tamron's approach to low-budget lenses nowadays. They don't feel bad at all. The only control point on the lens is a plastic manual focus ring. It doesn't turn amazingly smoothly, but the focus motor does respond nicely to it being turned. As you can see here, we do see rather a strong amount of focus breathing on display as you focus in and out, which can be bothersome to video makers and some macro photographers. When shooting in single shot autofocus mode, the lens's autofocus motor is quiet and accurate but really quite slow. As usual though, on a Sony camera, switch over to autofocus continuous mode for a speed boost, although it's still not exactly the fastest I've ever seen. The lens comes with an unusually shaped hood, which will actually help to reduce flaring, while still letting you mount a filter on the front. It does not feature image stabilization. Overall, the build quality is absolutely fine here. It works okay considering its price. Now let's take a look at image quality. I'll be testing this one on my full frame camera, a 42MP Sony a7R III. In-camera corrections are turned on. In the middle of the image we see razor sharpness and excellent contrast straight from the maximum aperture of f2.8, and in the corners, well, they're not quite as razor sharp, but they still look very nice indeed. Lots of good contrast and detail is being captured here. f4 looks about as sharp, but f5.6 sees a bit more resolution making its way through, and f8 and f11 look equally fantastic. Stop down as far as f16 or f22 for image quality to get gradually softer due to diffraction. Still though, this is a brilliant performance from the little lens. It punches well above its price point. Let's take a look at distortion and vignetting now. Normally, these are corrected by your camera, but you can see the true results by turning in-camera corrections off. The lens projects a little barrel distortion, nothing serious, but if you don't correct that vignetting, then your corners will look really dark. That corner darkness is reduced at f4 and f5.6, but they never fully brighten. Leave your corrections on. Alright, the macro ability of this lens is a nice little ace up its sleeve, so let's take a look at the close-up image quality. It's good news here too. No degradation close-up, the lens is just as sharp as ever. Stop down to f11 for the image to start looking a little softer from diffraction, and f16 and f22 look pretty rough. Still, there's no avoiding diffraction, so this can be classed as an essentially perfect result. Now, let's see how the lens performs against bright light. Yeah, everything seems to be in order here too. Flaring is kept to an absolute minimum, even at the brightest aperture of f2.8. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look at Coma Smearing. Good news yet again, I can't see any of it here. Let's zoom out and look for sun stars now. You need to stop down to f11 for those to emerge, and finally at f16 or f22 they look pretty dramatic. Let's take a look at the lens's out of focus backgrounds now. The bokeh is happily neutral here, looking averagely soft without any noticeable problems to dwell on. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f2.8, a reasonably small amount of colour fringing is visible on bokeh highlights if you get up really close. Stop down to f4 and it's tamed back. Overall, well, this inexpensive 35mm f2.8 lens might not have the sexiest parameters or design aesthetic, but it certainly packs plenty of image quality mojo, and I'm super impressed by its capabilities. Its chunky size and slightly slow autofocus make it feel like quite a casual lens to keep on your camera, but the images it produces are bursting with contrast and detail. If you are on the market for a relatively simple but high quality lens like this for a reasonable price, then it does have to come highly recommended. Blah 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 Patreon, blah 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 exclusive content, blah blah blah, link in the description below. And thank you so much to all my supporters who are keeping these lens reviews trucking on. Take care everyone.